My husband betrayed me with my best friend on Christmas, but the gift I hid under the tree changed my destiny. I never imagined that the cruelest words of my life would come wrapped in gold paper, alongside the scent of homemade pecan pie. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if you, for just a second, feel like this sounds familiar, I just ask that you leave a like and subscribe. It will help me keep venting. It was Christmas Eve in our small apartment in a quieter corner of Park Slope, Brooklyn. The tree lights flickered faintly against the yellowish walls that had needed a fresh coat of paint for 3 years. The aroma of the classic prime rib I'd been preparing since 5 in the morning mingled with the bayberry candle I always lit for the holidays, a custom I inherited from my grandmother, Eleanor. My hands, wrinkled and spotted from 67 years of life, trembled as I placed the last dishes on the table. The embroidered tablecloth, a hand-me-down from my mother, looked immaculate, ironed with the obsessive care of someone who knows that details matter when the heart is breaking. At 9:30, the doorbell rang. My heart sped up, as it always did when I waited for family, that mix of excitement and anxiety understood only by mothers who have given everything without asking for anything in return. "Mom," shouted Sarah, my eldest daughter, sweeping in like a hurricane, her heels clicking against the vintage tile floor. "Is everything ready yet? Because we're hungry and we're in a rush." There was no kiss. No hug. Just that evaluating look she always gave me, as if calculating how long she'd have to fake affection before she could leave. Behind her appeared David, my son-in-law, his expensive suit contrasting cruelly with my floral dress, which I'd bought during a sale at Macy's 5 years ago. His greeting was a grunt while he checked his mobile phone, probably reviewing the cryptocurrency investments he boasted about so much. "Where are the kids?" I asked, wiping my hands on the apron I'd embroidered when I still believed Christmas meant joy. "They stayed with the other grandmother," Sarah replied without looking at me. "She says she buys them better gifts." The knife twisted deeper. My grandchildren, Olivia and Alex, preferred to spend Christmas Eve with the family with money, not with the grandmother who saved every penny to buy them what they asked for every year. At 10 o'clock, Ethan, my youngest son, arrived with his girlfriend of the moment. This one was named Chloe and she worked, according to him, in digital marketing. Her way of glancing at my home, with that condescending smile that pierced me like glass shards, made me realize I was simply part of the scenery she had to tolerate. "Smells like old people food," Chloe murmured, loud enough for me to hear. Ethan laughed. My own son laughed. But the final blow arrived at 10:15, when the doorbell rang for the 3rd time. It was Frank, my husband of 42 years. He entered accompanied by Linda, my best friend since we were 20 years old. The woman who had cried on my shoulder when she lost her first husband, whom I had lent money to when she lost her job, who had been a witness at my wedding and the godmother to my children. Linda wore a red designer dress that I could never afford, with a neckline that showed a gold chain with a heart pendant. A pendant I immediately recognized because it had been mine, a wedding gift that mysteriously disappeared from my jewelry box 6 months ago. "Linda. What a surprise." I lied, even though my stomach had already twisted into a knot of suspicion. Frank avoided my gaze. After 42 years of marriage, you know every gesture, every nervous tick. And tonight, his way of nervously touching the gray mustache that grew since his retirement screamed at me that something terrible was about to happen. We sat at the table I had decorated with so much love. The candles cast dancing shadows over our faces, but the only light I saw was the coldness in the eyes of the people I loved most in the world. Dinner proceeded between forced conversations about David's job, who managed a multi-million-dollar hedge fund, Sarah's trips, financed by her husband's dividends, and Ethan's projects, who always had ideas for quick fortunes but never money for gas. I ate in silence, chewing each bite as if it were sand, while watching Linda behave in my own house with a familiarity that chilled my blood. She knew where the glasses were kept. She knew which drawer held the napkins. She even got up to pour the wine without asking. "How do you know the kitchen so well?" I asked with a smile that strained my facial muscles. "Oh, Grace, you know Frank and I have been preparing some things together," Linda replied with a laugh that sounded like broken bells. Frank cleared his throat and stood up abruptly. "Well, family," he said, raising his glass of red wine, "I think it's time for a special toast." Everyone raised their glasses. I did too, though my hands were shaking so much the wine sloshed like a sea in a storm. "To new beginnings," Frank continued, looking directly at Linda, "and to the courage to seek happiness where it truly belongs." Linda smiled, and her eyes shone with tears of happiness. Sarah and David exchanged knowing glances. Ethan hugged Chloe as if it were the most romantic thing in the world. And I stood there with my glass held high, feeling the world crumble beneath my feet like a house of cards. "What do you mean?" I whispered, though I already knew. I had known since the moment I saw that pendant hanging from my best friend's neck. Frank cleared his throat and looked at me for the first time all night. Grace, Linda and we've been together for 2 years. We're getting married in the spring. We've already talked to the kids, and they agree. It's for the best for everyone. The glass slipped from my hands and shattered on the tile floor, spilling red wine like blood over my mother's embroidered tablecloth. But no one moved to help me. No one flinched. No one looked surprised. It was as if they were watching a movie they knew by heart, patiently waiting for the protagonist to understand that her role was over. And I understood that I had been living a gilded lie for 42 years, wrapped in gift paper and tied with the ribbon of my own naivety. The silence spread like spilled oil, thick and sticky, while the candles kept flickering, indifferent to the fact that they had turned my life to ashes. I remained there, sitting like a pillar of salt, while my family continued dinner as if nothing had happened. As if they had just commented on the weather or the football scores. As if they hadn't destroyed 42 years of my life with the same casualness with which they cut a slice of bread. Linda got up to collect the shards of my broken glass, and for a moment I thought it was a gesture of consideration. But when she bent down, I saw Frank take the opportunity to caress her back with a familiarity that turned my stomach. It was the same gesture he used to make to me when we were young, when I still believed I was the woman of his life. "Don't worry, Grace," Linda said with that sweet voice that now sounded like poison. "Accidents happen. Especially at our age." Our age. As if we were contemporaries in decrepitude, when she had been sleeping with my husband for 2 years while I ironed his shirts and prepared his favorite meals. Sarah poured herself more wine without offering me any. "Mom, we think it's better you know right away. Dad is moving out next month." Linda already found a beautiful condo in Manhattan, near Central Park. With a balcony and everything. David nodded while carving the gourmet roast he'd purchased with the last few $100s I had left after paying the utility bills. "It's a property valued at over $500,000. A smart investment, considering the prices per square foot in that area have risen 20% this year." They spoke of figures as if they were poetry. As if money were more beautiful than feelings. As if the value of a property weighed more than the value of a shared life. "And me?" I asked with a voice I didn't recognize as my own. "What's going to happen to me?" Frank finally looked at me, but his eyes were vacant, as if he had erased every memory of the two of us. "You can stay in the apartment. For now, at least. Linda and I have spoken to an attorney, and technically you have the right to live here until the divorce is settled." Divorce. The word fell onto the table like a bomb that doesn't immediately explode, but which will devastate everything in a few seconds. "But Mom," Sarah continued, "you have to understand that this apartment also has value. We're talking about at least $300,000 on the current market. It's not fair for Dad to lose his part of the investment." Investment. My home of 40 years was an investment. The hallways where my children took their first steps, the kitchen where I had prepared thousands of meals, the bedroom where I had cried and laughed and loved, all reduced to numbers on a calculator. Ethan, who had remained quiet until now, suddenly chimed in. "Besides, Mom, let's be realistic. You don't have income. Just grandmother's pension, which can't be much. You can't maintain an apartment this size by yourself." Chloe looked at him admiringly, as if he had said something profoundly wise instead of driving another knife into my heart. "It's true," Linda added. "Grace, honey, you need to think about your future. There are lovely senior living communities. Places where you can make friends, participate in activities." The word community floated in the air like a death sentence. I imagined myself in a small room, sharing a bathroom with strangers, eating flavorless pureed food while waiting for someone, anyone, to come visit me on Sundays. "But I cared for my own mother at home until her last day," I murmured. "I never put her in a home." "Times change, Mom," Sarah said with that forced patience used with fussy children. "Families were different back then. Now we all have our own lives, our own economic struggles." Economic struggles. Sarah, whose husband managed a multi-million-dollar fund. Ethan, who spent more on one dinner than I spent on food in a month. Frank, who had been secretly saving to buy a new life with my best friend. "Since when?" I suddenly asked, interrupting a conversation about the tax advantages of selling property in New York. "Since when what?" Frank asked, annoyed by the interruption. "Since when have you and Linda, since when have you been betraying me?" The silence that followed was different from the previous one. This one had weight, density. It was the silence of truth hidden beneath lies. Linda lowered her gaze and nervously touched the pendant that had been mine. "Grace, it's not a betrayal. It just happened. You can't control love." 2 years, Frank said abruptly. "It started 2 years ago, when you were caring for your sister in the hospital." I remembered those 3 terrible months when Aunt Amparo was fighting cancer. I stayed at the hospital day and night, sleeping in uncomfortable chairs, living on coffee and vending machine snacks. Frank claimed he couldn't join me because he had to work, because someone had to keep the house running. While I held my dying sister's hand, he was holding my best friend's hand in the bed we had shared for 4 decades. During Aunt Amparo's chemo, I continued, more to myself than to them. While I was cleaning up her vomit and reading her stories to help her sleep, "You too, Mom, don't be dramatic," Sarah cut me off. "Things happen. Feelings change. It's better that Dad is honest now instead of faking it for more years." Honest. 2 years of lies, and they called it honesty. Linda stood up and approached me. For a moment I thought she would apologize, that she would explain how it had happened, that she would show even a tiny bit of remorse. Instead, she placed a hand on my shoulder with a maternal smile. "Grace, you have to be happy for us. Frank and I are happy. And you can be happy too. You just have to accept that this stage of your life is over and start a new one." I removed her hand from my shoulder as if it burned. "And all those afternoons you spent here? All those times you asked me for advice about men? All those confidences about how lonely you felt?" "I wasn't faking my loneliness," Linda replied. "It was real. But Frank helped me overcome it. He made me feel alive again. As a woman, not just a widow. As a woman. As if I, at 67, had ceased to be a woman. As if love were a limited resource that ran out with age, a fixed amount of male attention that had to be distributed among the women who still deserved it." David checked his watch, a Rolex worth more than my annual pension. "Well, I think it's getting late. The Asian markets open soon, and I want to review my Bitcoin positions before turning in." He stood up unceremoniously, kissed Sarah on the forehead, and gave me a polite smile, the kind you give a waitress after paying the bill. "Have a Merry Christmas, Grace. And remember what we discussed about the apartment. It's important that everyone comes out ahead in this situation." Ethan and Chloe followed them, she clinging to his arm as if he were a trophy she'd won at a carnival. My children bid farewell with air kisses and empty promises to call soon. Linda picked up her purse, a designer handbag I recognized because I'd been admiring it in the Fifth Avenue window for months, and approached me for a hug that made me tremble with disgust. "We'll see each other soon, right? We can get coffee and talk, just like always. Nothing has to change between us." Frank was waiting by the door, holding Linda's coat with the gallantry he had stopped showing me years ago. Before leaving, he turned back to me. "Grace, I know this is hard. But we both deserve to be happy in the time we have left. We're not young anymore." And they left. They all left. I was left alone in my kitchen, surrounded by dirty dishes and the remains of the dinner I had prepared with so much love. The Christmas tree kept blinking its colored lights, oblivious to the fact that they had turned my life to ashes. I walked to the bedroom and sat on the bed where I had slept with Frank for 4 decades. The sheets smelled different. They smelled of Linda's perfume, of betrayal, of secrets kept in the dark. I opened the drawer of my nightstand and pulled out the notebook where I had been writing my memoirs. On the first page, I had written, "For my grandchildren, so they know who their grandmother was." With trembling hands, I tore out the page and ripped it to shreds. I no longer had a story to tell. I no longer had a family to remember me. I only had the silence of a house that no longer felt like mine and the echo of a laugh I had believed sincere for 60 years of friendship. Outside, it began to rain, and the drops against the window sounded like tears I could no longer shed. The days following Christmas Eve passed like a dense fog. I woke up every morning hoping it had all been a nightmare, that Frank was still sleeping beside me, snoring softly as he had for 4 decades. But his side of the bed remained cold, and his pillow no longer carried the scent of the cheap cologne he bought at Walmart. Frank returned the Friday after Christmas, but not as the husband who had shared my life. He arrived like a stranger with keys, accompanied by Linda and 2 young men with cardboard boxes. "I'm just here for my things," he announced without looking me in the eye. "We won't take long." Linda smiled that fake smile at me, the one I now recognized as the mask she had worn for 2 years. "Hi, Grace. How are you, honey? I hope you've been able to rest since the other night." I stayed on the sofa, watching them dismantle my life. Frank took his clothes from the closet, but not only his own. He also took the suit I had given him for our 30th anniversary, the one I had bought with the money I saved for 6 months by selling my grandmother's gold earrings. Linda wandered through my house as if she were the new owner, pointing out objects that Frank might need in his new life. "Isn't this coffee maker too old?" she said, examining the espresso machine we had bought together at Macy's 10 years ago. "Frank always says coffee is important for starting the day right." "It's our coffee maker," I murmured. "It was yours," Frank corrected from the bedroom. "Now I need a fresh start. Everything new." They took the coffee maker. They also took the set of pans I had chosen for our kitchen, the floor lamp we bought at an antique shop when we were dating, and even the small cactus I kept on the living room windowsill. "The cactus too?" I asked, feeling my voice break. "Linda has a good hand with plants," Frank replied. "In my new life, I want everything to flourish." Flourish. As if I had been a drought in his existence, and Linda was the rain he had been waiting for 42 years. One of the young movers tripped over the dining room table, the same one where we had eaten Christmas Eve dinner. One of the legs wobbled, and I heard the wood creak. "Be careful," I said. "That table was my mother's." Frank stopped for a moment and looked at me with what might have been remorse. "That table stays here, Grace. I don't have room for old memories." Old memories? That was me. That was all the years we had spent together. Old memories that didn't fit in his new life. When they finished, the house felt like a skeleton. The empty spaces on the walls where pictures had hung left lighter rectangles, showing how the paint had aged around the memories that were no longer there. Linda came over to say goodbye, and for a moment I thought she would at least have the decency to show discomfort about the situation. "Grace, I hope we can still be friends. What happened between Frank and me has nothing to do with you. It just, love arrived when we least expected it." "Friends?" I repeated the word as if it were a language I didn't understand. "How can you ask me to be your friend after this?" "Because I love you, silly," Linda said, and she had the audacity to pinch my cheek as if we were two schoolgirls. "I've always loved you. You're like a sister to me." A sister whose husband, jewelry, and now dignity she had stolen. Frank waited at the door with 2 suitcases. Before leaving, he turned to me one last time. "Grace, the lawyer will call you next week to discuss the divorce. Be reasonable, please. We both deserve a comfortable life in our golden years." Golden years. As if gold could be bought with betrayal. And they left. This time, forever. I sat on my empty sofa and tried to remember what my life had been like before Frank. I was 22 when we married. I couldn't remember what it felt like to be alone, to make decisions without consulting anyone, to sleep without worrying about waking another person. The phone rang at 6 in the evening. It was Sarah. "Mom, Dad told me he picked up his stuff. How are you?" For a moment, my heart quickened. Maybe my daughter had called to comfort me, to tell me she was on my side, that she understood how hard this was. "Not great, Sarah. I feel very alone." "Well, Mom, you have to understand this is better for everyone. Dad wasn't happy anymore, and you didn't seem very happy these last few years either." "I didn't seem happy?" "Sarah, I didn't know anything about this. How could I not seem happy if I didn't know my husband was cheating on me?" "Mom, don't play the victim. Marriages end. It happens all the time. Look, I'm calling because I have to tell you something important." My stomach tightened. After everything that had happened, what else could go wrong? "David and I have been speaking with a family law attorney. He says you're entitled to half the apartment's value, but also that Dad has the right to sell his share." "Sell?" "Mom, think about it. Dad needs capital to start his new life. He can't have his money tied up in an apartment where he won't live. And you can't afford to maintain such a large apartment by yourself either." Capital. Money tied up. My daughter spoke as if she were a financial advisor instead of the child I had raised, fed, and cared for 23 years. "Sarah, this is my home. You were born here. You took your first steps here, Mom. Feelings don't pay bills. Plus, we have expenses too. David is investing a lot of money in his new cryptocurrency firm, and we need liquidity." "What does that have to do with me?" "If you sell the apartment, you could help us with a loan. Just until David's businesses start generating returns. We're talking about an investment that could generate millions of dollars in 5 years. Millions of dollars." My daughter was asking me to sell my home to finance her husband's delusions of grandeur. "Sarah, I don't have money to lend anyone. I only have my pension, which is $700 a month." "Exactly, Mom. You can't live in an apartment worth $300,000 on a $700 pension. It's economic madness. Sell your portion, buy something small on Staten Island, and use the difference to help your family." "Help my family?" "The same family that hadn't lifted a finger to help me when I was left alone on Christmas Eve." "And what does Ethan think about all this?" "Ethan agrees. In fact, he needs money too. He's setting up an online trading startup. He says with $50,000 he could start, and he could double the investment in a year." $50,000. The sixth part of everything I could get from my house, to fund the entrepreneurial whims of my 2 children. "Sarah, I need time to think." "Sure, Mom. But not too much. The markets are really good right now, and David says Bitcoin opportunities don't wait for anyone." I hung up the phone and stared at the empty walls of my living room. The same walls where photos of my children when they were little had hung, where I had marked their height with a pencil every birthday, where I had celebrated every achievement and comforted every defeat. Now those walls only returned the echo of my own breathing. I got up and walked to the window. Outside, New York continued its nightlife. The lights of the buildings drew urban constellations, and people walked the streets with that cheerful rush of the weekend. Families going out to dinner, couples heading to the movies, young people starting their night out. Everyone had somewhere to go. Everyone had someone to be with. I only had an apartment that no longer felt like home and a family that saw me as a financial asset that needed to be liquidated. The reflection of my face in the glass showed me a woman I didn't recognize. Her eyes were sunken, her cheeks had lost the rosy color they always had, and her gray hair desperately needed a trip to the salon. When had I started looking so old? When had I stopped taking care of myself? When had I started becoming invisible to the people I loved most? I touched the glass with the palm of my hand, feeling the cold seep in from the street. What am I going to do now? I asked my reflection. But my reflection, like everyone else in my life, had no answer. On Monday morning, the doorbell rang exactly at 8 o'clock. I opened the door expecting the mail carrier, but I found a suited man holding a yellow envelope with the court seal. Grace Miller? Yes. Legal documents. Sign here, please. My hands trembled as I scribbled my name on the paper. The envelope weighed as if it contained stones instead of papers. Inside were the divorce documents. Frank hadn't wasted any time. He had hired one of those expensive downtown Manhattan lawyers, the kind who charge $300 an hour and know exactly how to strip a 67-year-old woman of everything she had built in life. The pages were full of legal terms I didn't understand, but there were phrases that stung like daggers: no-fault divorce based on irreconcilable differences, liquidation of marital estate, waiver of alimony. Frank waived his right to ask me for alimony. How generous of him, considering I only had $700 a month, and he had been collecting an $1,800 monthly retirement check for the last 3 years. The phone didn't stop ringing all week. First, it was Ethan. Mom, did you get the divorce papers? David says it's important you hire your own attorney. But not an expensive one, okay? A public defender is fine. It'll be quick and smooth. Smooth? Ethan, they're taking away my house. They're not taking anything, Mom. They're giving you a chance for a fresh start. And hey, while we're talking, remember that money you lent me last year for the apartment security deposit? I remembered. $5,000 I had taken from my small savings because Ethan said it was an emergency, that he would pay me back in 3 months. What about that money? Well, since you're going to sell the apartment now and you'll have liquidity, I thought you could consider that loan an advance on my inheritance. You know, so we don't have to complicate things with repayments when you have so much money coming in. An advance on my inheritance. My 40-year-old son was planning my financial death before I had even started processing my marital death. Ethan, I need that money now. If I'm going to live alone, I'll need every dollar I have. Oh, Mom, don't be dramatic. With what you get from the apartment, you can buy something small in Newark or Queens, and you'll have money left over to live like a queen for years. Newark or Queens. They wanted to exile me to the suburbs, far from everything I knew, as if at my age I could start establishing roots in strange soil. Then Sarah called, but her conversation was even worse. Mom, I've been talking to David about your financial situation. He says if you invest half of what you get from the apartment into his crypto fund, you could triple your money in 2 years. Sarah, I don't understand anything about cryptocurrency. That's why you need to trust David. He's an expert. He manages millions of dollars in investments. He says Bitcoin will hit $100,000 per unit before 2025. And if I lose the money? Mom, that mentality is exactly the problem. Poor people think about losing, rich people think about winning. If you want to stay poor your whole life, keep your money in the bank and earn 2% annually. But if you want to secure your future, you have to take risks. Take risks. At 67, after having lost my husband, my best friend, and my home, they were asking me to risk the only thing I had left. I don't know, Sarah. I need to think about it. Well, don't think too long. David says the crypto market doesn't wait for anyone. Opportunities pass quickly, and then you regret it for the rest of your life. I hung up the phone and poured myself a cup of tea. The silence in the house had become deafening. Every noise I made, the clinking of the spoon against the cup, my steps on the hardwood floor, the sound of boiling water, was amplified into echoes bouncing against the empty walls. I decided to go for a walk. I needed fresh air, I needed to see people, I needed to remember that a world existed beyond divorce papers and my children's calls. I walked down Fifth Avenue towards Midtown, looking at the storefronts that were already beginning to advertise the January sales. Young couples walked hand in hand, pointing out things they wanted to buy to each other. Families with small children headed towards the parks. Groups of friends laughed while planning their weekend shopping. Everyone had plans. Everyone had people to make those plans with. I sat on a bench in Union Square Park and watched people pass by. An elderly woman who might have been my age approached with her shopping cart. "Is the other end of the bench free?" she asked politely. Of course. She sat down with a tired sigh and began to review her shopping list. "The prices are impossible," she commented to no one in particular. "Everything gets more expensive every time I come to the market." "It's true," I replied. "I can barely afford to shop like I used to." "Are you alone too?" she asked, and there was something in her voice that suggested she recognized a sister in solitude in me. Yes. My husband left me a week ago. Oh, honey. I'm so sorry. After many years? 42. The woman shook her head, as if she had heard that story too many times. Something similar happened to me. My Henry left with someone from work when we hit 30 years of marriage. Said he needed to find himself. And what did you do? What could I do? Keep going. There was no other option. But I won't lie to you, the first few months were terrible. You feel like you're invisible, like you don't matter to anyone anymore. That's exactly how I feel. Do you have children? 2. But they're more concerned about the money they're going to inherit than how I'm doing. The woman nodded with a bitter smile. Child, how familiar that sounds. Mine, too. As soon as the divorce became public, they were calculating how much they would get from the sale of the apartment. Did you sell your house? I had to. But I'm going to give you a piece of advice, honey. Don't do anything rash. Take your time. The vultures can afford to wait. We talked for almost an hour. Her name was Eleanor, like my grandmother, and she had lived in a small apartment in Queens for 5 years. She told me what it was like to start over at 62, how she learned to cook for one person, how she had to make new friends because her lifelong friends had chosen sides in the divorce. Do you regret it? I asked her before we said goodbye. Regret what? Getting divorced? Selling the house? Starting over? Eleanor looked at me with eyes that had seen too much, but still held a spark of life. Honey, the only thing I regret is not doing it sooner. There were years when I was already alone, but I pretended I had company. Now I'm alone, but at least it's an honest solitude. I returned home with Eleanor's words echoing in my head. An honest solitude. There was something liberating about that phrase, something I hadn't considered until that moment. That night, as I prepared my solitary dinner, an omelette and a side salad, the phone rang again. This time it was Linda. Grace, honey, how are you? The calmness with which she asked the question, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, left me speechless for a few seconds. How do you think I am, Linda? Oh, don't be like that. I'm calling because Frank is worried about you. He says you haven't answered the lawyer's calls. I haven't had time. Grace, you have to be practical. The sooner you resolve this, the sooner you can start your new life. Frank and I want to help you find a nice, little condo. We've already looked at some listings online. You two have been looking for an apartment for me? We just want to help, honey. We found a beautiful one in Long Island, 1 bedroom, very bright. It only costs $70,000. You'd have money left over to live comfortably. Long Island. An hour commute from the city center, where I knew no one, where I would have to start completely from scratch at 67. Linda, I don't want to move to Long Island. But Grace, be reasonable. What are you going to do in such a big apartment by yourself? It's a waste. And besides, think about Frank. He also has a right to his share of the marital estate. Marital estate. As if 42 years of marriage were a business that needed to be liquidated and divided among the shareholders. Linda, were you ever truly my friend? The silence on the other end of the line stretched for several seconds. Of course, Grace. I always have been. That's why I'm trying to help you now. Help me? Linda, you stole my husband. You're not helping me, you're finishing destroying me. Grace, nobody stole anything from anyone. Frank chose. And he chose to be happy. Can't you be happy for him? I hung up without answering. I sat in my kitchen, surrounded by the silence that had become my only constant companion, and for the first time since Christmas Eve, I felt something different from sadness. I felt rage. A clean, clear rage that warmed me inside as if I had drunk brandy. How dare they plan my life? How dare they decide where I should live, how I should spend my money, how I should feel about my own betrayal? I got up and walked to the mirror in the hallway. The woman looking back at me was still the same, but there was something different in her eyes. They no longer looked like the eyes of a victim. They looked like the eyes of someone who was starting to wake up. The rage kept me awake all night. It wasn't a destructive rage, but something more powerful, a silent fury that ran through my veins like electricity, illuminating corners of my mind that had been dark for decades. At 6 in the morning, I was up, dressed in my best suit, the navy blue one I had bought for my niece's wedding, and with a determination I hadn't felt in years. I had a mission. My first stop was the bank, the Chase Bank on the corner of my street, where I had been a client for over 30 years. I asked to speak with the branch manager. Good morning, Ms. Miller. How can we help you? I want to close the joint account I have with my husband and open a new account solely in my name. The man, a chubby gentleman in his 50s, consulted his computer with a frown. I understand you are in the process of divorce. To close a joint account, we need the signature of both holders, or a court order. What if I just withdraw my share of the money? You can certainly do that. You have the right to withdraw up to half of the available balance. I remained silent while he typed numbers into his computer. The joint account held $12,000. $6,000 for me. It wasn't a fortune, but it was a start. I want to withdraw $6,000 and transfer them to a new account in my name. Of course. Cash or transfer? Transfer. And I want the new account to be at a different branch. Downtown Manhattan. The manager looked at me curiously but didn't ask questions. Half an hour later, I had a new account at the downtown branch with $6,000 that Frank couldn't touch. My second stop was the lawyer's office Sarah had mentioned. Not a public defender, as she had suggested. A real one. The firm was in an elegant building near the courthouse. The receptionist, a young woman with perfect nails, looked at me with that professional smile used for clients who probably can't afford the full fees. "Do you have an appointment with Mr. Mendoza?" "No, but I urgently need a legal consultation. It's about a divorce." "One moment, please." 5 minutes later, I was sitting across from Ricardo Mendoza, a man in his 60s with gray hair and a genuine smile that immediately reassured me. "Tell me your situation, Ms. Miller." I explained everything. The betrayal, the divorce documents, the pressure from my children to sell the apartment, the veiled threats from Linda and Frank. He took notes in a leather notebook while I spoke. "How long have you been married?" 42 years. "Did your husband work that entire time?" "Yes. I worked until Sarah was born, then I stayed home caring for the children." "Did you contribute financially to the household after you stopped working?" "I cared for my elderly parents until they passed away. I inherited a small sum from my mother, which I put into the joint account. I also inherited some jewelry from my grandmother that I sold to pay the down payment on the apartment where we live now." The lawyer smiled for the first time since I had started talking. "Ms. Miller, you have many more rights than you realize. Your contribution to the marriage was not just economic, it allowed your husband to develop his career without worrying about childcare or elder care. That has economic value." "What do you mean?" "It means you are likely entitled to more than half the value of the apartment. And you are definitely entitled to spousal support, alimony." But Frank already waived his right to ask me for alimony. "Ms. Miller, spousal support is different. It's what he must pay you to compensate for the economic imbalance caused by the divorce. You sacrificed your professional career for the marriage and family. He must compensate that loss." For the first time in weeks, I felt something akin to hope. "How much would you charge to represent me?" "My fees are $200 an hour. But your case is clear, and I estimate we would need between 20 and 30 hours of work. However, if we win spousal support, my fees can be paid from the first monthly payment." I left the lawyer's office feeling as if I had woken up from a long, confusing dream. For the first time in my adult life, I had made an important decision without consulting anyone. I had hired an expensive lawyer, opened my own bank account, and started defending my rights. My third stop was the most important, the jewelry store on 47th Street where I had bought my engagement ring 50 years ago. "Good morning. I'd like to sell this." I placed my wedding band on the counter. The jeweler, an older man with magnifying glasses, examined it carefully. "It's 18-karat gold. Good condition. I can give you $800. $800 for 42 years of marriage." It seemed small, but I needed it more than I needed to remember broken promises. "I accept." When I left the jewelry store, my finger felt strangely light. There was no pain, just a feeling of liberation, as if I had released something I had been carrying for too long. That afternoon, when the phone rang, I didn't jump to answer as I had for decades. I let it ring 3 times before deciding if I wanted to talk. It was Frank. "Grace, the bank called me." "Why did you withdraw money from our account?" "Because it's my money just as much as yours." "Where did you put it?" "In my new account." A long silence on the other end of the line. "Grace, that's not smart. You need that money for when we sell the apartment. Moving expenses, deposits. I'm not selling the apartment." "What do you mean you're not selling the apartment?" "Exactly that. My lawyer says I have the right to stay. And also the right to spousal support." "Your lawyer?" "Grace, what have you done?" "I've done what I should have done years ago. Take care of myself." "Grace, be reasonable. You can't afford an expensive lawyer. You don't have money for those things." "I have more money than you think. And more rights than you led me to believe." I hung up the phone before he could respond. 20 minutes later, it rang again. It was Sarah, and her voice sounded hysterical. "Mom, what have you done? Dad says you hired a lawyer and you're causing trouble." "I'm not causing trouble. I'm defending my rights." "Mom, we are your family. You don't need lawyers to fight us." "Sarah, for the past 2 weeks, my family has treated me like an obstacle that needs to be moved out of the way. Your father betrayed me, you and Ethan want my money for your investments, and all of you had already planned my life without asking me what I wanted." "But Mom, we were trying to help you." "No, Sarah. You were trying to help yourselves. There's a difference. Mom, if you continue with that attitude, you're going to lose your whole family. You know what, Sarah? I think I already lost it a long time ago. I just finally realized it. I hung up again. The silence that followed was different from all the silences I had experienced in the past few weeks. It wasn't the empty silence of loneliness, but the complete silence of peace. It was the silence of someone who had stopped waiting for the phone to ring, who had stopped needing the approval of others, who had started listening to her own voice after decades of silencing it. I prepared dinner, a salad with salmon I bought at Nordstrom's without looking at the price, and sat down to eat calmly, savoring every bite. I turned on the television and put on an old romantic movie, one of those where women were strong and elegant and didn't let anyone treat them badly. For the first time in my life, I didn't have to ask anyone what they wanted to watch. I didn't have to cook for someone else's taste. I didn't have to turn off the light early because someone else had to wake up early. That night, I slept 8 hours straight for the first time in years. There were no snores to wake me up, no worries about whether Frank had come home late from work, no anxiety about pleasing someone the next day. When I woke up on Tuesday morning, the sun streamed through my bedroom window, creating golden patterns on the sheets. I stayed there for a moment, enjoying the tranquility, feeling my body fully relax for the first time in weeks. I got up without rushing, made myself a strong cup of coffee the way I liked it, not watered down the way Frank liked it, and sat on the balcony to watch life pass by on the street. A young couple walked toward the subway holding hands. An old man walked his dog while reading the newspaper. A woman my age watered the plants on her balcony while humming a song. Normal life, quiet life. Life without drama. For the first time in 42 years, I could imagine living a life like that. A life that was mine. On Wednesday afternoon, the doorbell rang insistently. Not once, but 5 times in a row, as if someone was desperate to get in. I looked through the peephole and saw Sarah, Ethan, David, and Chloe standing in the hallway like a reverse welcoming committee. I took a deep breath before opening the door. Mom, we need to talk, Sarah said without even saying hello, pushing the door open to enter. The 4 of them settled in my living room as if they were organizing an intervention. David carried a folder full of papers that he placed on the coffee table as if about to give an executive presentation. Mom, Ethan began, you're making a huge mistake. Dad told us about the lawyer. And it's insane, David interrupted. Expensive lawyers are for people who have assets to defend. You don't have enough assets to justify those expenses. David opened his folder and pulled out several papers filled with numbers and charts. I've run some calculations. If you sell the apartment now, with the real estate market the way it is, you could get about $350,000. After paying taxes and commissions, you would be left with roughly $300,000 clean. He pointed to a sheet where he had drawn a graph with numbers supposedly representing my financial future. If you invest $200,000 in my crypto fund, he continued, and keep $100,000 in liquidity for immediate expenses, in 5 years you could have over $1 million. $1 million, Mom. Do you realize what that means? It means you want to gamble my house in the internet casino, I replied. It's not gambling. David protested, clearly offended. It's strategic investment. Bitcoin has had an average return of 300% annually over the past 5 years. And what happens if I lose everything? That mentality is exactly the problem, Sarah said. Mom, you have to think like an entrepreneur, not like a retiree who keeps money under the mattress. Chloe, who had been quietly checking her phone until now, looked up. Ms. Miller, I don't know if you know, but Ethan and I are planning to get married next year. And honestly, we need startup capital for our online trading business. How much capital? I asked, though I already knew I wouldn't like the answer. $50,000 to start, Ethan replied. It's a safe investment, Mom. Currency trading moves trillions of dollars daily. We just need to enter the market with enough liquidity to make meaningful trades. $50,000. The 6th part of everything I could get from my house, to fund the delusions of grandeur of my youngest son and his girlfriend, who hadn't even bothered to ask me politely. And of course, Sarah added, we have plans too. David is opening a branch of his firm in Chicago, and we need money for the office deposit and the first few months of operation. How much do you need? $75,000. But it's practically a guaranteed loan, because the fund will generate commissions from the first month. I stayed silent, doing mental math. $50,000 for Ethan, $75,000 for Sarah, $200,000 for David's investments. That totaled $325,000. More than I could get from the apartment, even in the best case scenario. Let me see if I understand, I said slowly. You want me to sell my home, the only security I have, to finance your businesses. And if those businesses fail, I'm left with nothing. They won't fail. David exclaimed. Mom, I manage investment portfolios of over $10 million. I know what I'm doing. And where will I live while you all get rich with my money? We told you already, Sarah replied. There are very nice apartments in the suburbs. You could even live in a luxury senior community, one of those with cleaning service and meals included. A luxury senior community. With my money paying for my children's entrepreneurial whims, while I lived in a shared room eating vegetable mush. And if I say no? The silence that followed was tense, heavy with a threat they didn't dare pronounce directly. Mom, Ethan finally said, we hope it doesn't come to that. We're a family. Families help each other out. Like you helped each other when I was left alone on Christmas Eve? That's different, Sarah protested. We couldn't change what happened between you and Dad. But this, we can all fix together. Fix it for yourselves, you mean? David closed his folder with a sharp gesture. Ms. Miller, I don't think you're grasping the opportunity we're offering you. This isn't charity. It's a family investment that benefits everyone. Everyone? How does losing my home benefit me? Because you'll multiply your assets, David insisted. Instead of having a property that doesn't generate income, you'll have liquid assets working for you 24 hours a day. Liquid assets. Income. Assets. My son-in-law spoke of my life as if it were a spreadsheet that needed optimizing. David, I said, looking him directly in the eye, would you risk the house where you live with your own children on these safe businesses? We already have our assets diversified, he replied. Our financial situation is different. Different how? We have regular incomes, emergency funds, private retirement plans, So these incredibly safe businesses are only for other people's money. Sarah stood up abruptly. Mom, you're being impossible. We're trying to help you, and you're treating us like con artists. Con artists? No, Sarah. Con artists are strangers who steal your money. You are my family, so I suppose this is called something else. Chloe put her phone away nervously. Ethan, I think we should go. Your mother is clearly not in a rational state to make decisions right now. I'm not in a rational state? I repeated. Chloe, do you know how old I am? 67, she replied cautiously. 67 years of making decisions. 67 years of caring for this family. 67 years of being rational enough to keep a house afloat, raise 2 children, and care for elderly parents. But now that I don't want to give away my money, suddenly I'm not in a fit state to decide. Ethan approached and placed his hands on my shoulders with that condescension adults use with fussy children. Mom, we understand you're hurt about Dad, but you can't let your emotions ruin your financial future. I shrugged his hands off. Ethan, my financial future is exactly that, mine. Not yours, not Sarah's, not your husband's or boyfriend's. Mine. But we're your family. Sarah yelled. Mothers are supposed to take care of their children. Until when, Sarah? How long am I supposed to take care of my children? You're 38 years old. Ethan is 40. When are you going to start taking care of yourselves? That's not what we're asking. Ethan protested. We just need startup capital. Ethan, you know what you really need? Get jobs. Like I did for 40 years. Like normal people do. David collected his papers with the efficiency of someone who had just lost a sales presentation. Ms. Miller, I believe you should reconsider your position. The markets don't wait, and opportunities like this don't come every day. David, do you know the difference between an opportunity and a scam? Real opportunities don't require a 67-year-old woman to risk everything she owns. They headed toward the door with the wounded dignity of commanders who thought they had already won the battle. Sarah turned back before leaving. Mom, I hope you know what you're doing. Because when you're alone and broke, don't come looking for us. Sarah, I replied with a calmness that surprised even myself, I'm already alone. The difference is that now, I am by my own choice. I closed the door and leaned against it, listening to their voices fade down the hall. They were arguing among themselves, likely planning their next strategy to convince me. But for the first time in my life, I didn't care what they thought. I walked to the window and looked out onto the street. A woman my age walked slowly with her shopping cart, stopping to greet a neighbor. An older man read the newspaper on a park bench. A retired couple shared a pastry on a cafe terrace. People who had learned to live with dignity, at their own pace, without having to justify every decision to children who saw them as funding sources. For the first time in weeks, I smiled. I was 67, I had a paid-off apartment, some savings, and the newly discovered freedom of not having to please anyone but myself. It was a good start. 3 weeks after my children's visit, I woke up on a Saturday morning with a strange sensation. It took me a few minutes to identify what it was: happiness. A quiet, deep happiness I hadn't felt in years, as if I had been breathing stale air for decades and had finally stepped outside. I got up without rushing and prepared a breakfast I hadn't allowed myself in years: toast with strawberry jam, coffee with milk, fresh orange juice, and a slice of gourmet specialty cheese. Not because it was a special day, but because I felt like eating it. While having breakfast, I checked my bank account on the laptop I had bought the previous week. The $6,000 I had withdrawn from the joint account were still there, along with the $800 from the ring sale and the $1,000 from my February pension. I had almost $8,000 that were entirely mine. It wasn't a fortune, but it was freedom. That morning I did something I hadn't done in 40 years. I got dressed to go out without having to explain to anyone where I was going. I put on my favorite olive green dress, the one Frank always said made me look too conspicuous, and my low-heeled shoes that Sarah criticized for being old lady shoes. My first destination was the chic salon in Soho that I had seen 1,000 times from the bus but never dared to enter because Frank said it was money thrown away. "Good morning. Do you have an opening for a cut and color?" The stylist, a young woman with pink hair and a genuine smile, examined my hair with a professional eye. "Sure. What were you thinking?" "Something completely different. For 40 years, I've had the same cut because my husband liked long hair. But I don't have a husband anymore, so I want something that I like." 2 hours later, I walked out of the salon with a shoulder-length cut, dyed an auburn brown that made my green eyes sparkle as they hadn't in years. The change was so radical that when I saw myself in a street mirror, it took a second to recognize myself. My second stop was a clothing boutique I had always admired from the sidewalk but considered too expensive for my budget. This time, I walked in without hesitation. "How can I help you?" "I need new clothes. Something elegant but comfortable. For a 67-year-old woman who is starting a new life." The saleswoman, a stylish woman my age, smiled as if she understood exactly what I needed. "I have just the thing." I tried on dresses that made me feel feminine without being ridiculous, jackets that gave me presence without being masculine, shoes that were elegant but comfortable enough to walk in for hours. For the first time in decades, I bought clothes thinking about how they made me feel, not whether they would be appropriate for Frank's wife or Sarah and Ethan's mother. I spent $600 that morning. $600 on myself, without guilt, without having to justify it to anyone. When I arrived home laden with bags, the answering machine was blinking with 5 messages. I listened to them while organizing my new clothes in the closet I no longer had to share. The first was from Frank. "Grace, we need to talk. Your lawyer is unnecessarily complicating things. Call me." The second was from Linda. "Honey, Frank is very worried about you. Why don't you come for lunch this Sunday? We can settle all this like civilized people." The third was from Sarah. "Mom, David says the Bitcoin market is skyrocketing. You still have time to take advantage of the opportunity. Don't be stubborn." The fourth was from Ethan. "Mom, Chloe found the perfect space for our trading office. We just need an answer from you to close the deal. It's urgent." The fifth was from a number I didn't recognize. "Ms. Miller, this is Ricardo Mendoza, your attorney. I have good news. Frank wants to negotiate. Can you come to my office Monday morning?" I deleted the first 4 messages without typing the replies. I only noted the appointment with the lawyer. That afternoon, I decided to do something I had been putting off for months: visit my sister Amparo at the local memorial park. I brought fresh flowers and a small bottle of water to clean the headstone. While arranging the flowers in the marble vase, I told Amparo everything that had happened. I told her about Frank's betrayal, my children's greed, and how I had discovered that I had been living for years to please people who only saw me as a resource to exploit. "You know what the weirdest thing is, Amparo?" I said to the headstone engraved with her name. "I'm not sad. For 40 years, I thought that without family, I would be nobody. But it turns out, without this family, I am more myself than ever." The wind rustled the cypress leaves, and for a moment I imagined it was Amparo whispering that I had done well. Leaving the memorial park, I passed by a neighborhood park I had never visited. I sat on a bench and watched the families enjoying the Saturday afternoon. Children running while their parents watched them, elderly couples walking slowly hand in hand, groups of friends laughing while splitting a pastry. A woman who might have been my age sat down at the other end of the bench. "Do you mind if I rest a bit?" she asked politely. Of course not. She turned out to be Martha, a 70-year-old widow who had lived alone for 5 years. She told me that after her husband's death, her children had tried to convince her to sell her house and move in with one of them. "And what did you do?" I told them no. That I appreciated their good intentions, but I was perfectly capable of taking care of myself. They were angry at first, but now we get along better than ever. "Don't you get lonely?" "Sometimes. But there's a big difference between being alone and feeling lonely. When I lived with my husband, sometimes I felt very lonely even though he was in the same room. Now that I am physically alone, I feel accompanied by myself." Her words resonated in my head all the way home. That night, I prepared a special dinner: pan-seared salmon with asparagus and a glass of white wine I had bought at a gourmet shop. I put on classical music on the sound system and lit candles as if it were a romantic date with myself. As I ate dinner, I reflected on the last few months. For 42 years, I had measured my worth by the happiness of others. If Frank was happy with dinner, if the children were satisfied with their gifts, if Linda felt heard when she came to tell me her problems. I had never asked if I was happy, satisfied, heard. Now, sitting in my candlelit dining room, eating food I had chosen, drinking wine I liked, listening to music that calmed me, I realized that for the first time in decades, I was exactly where I wanted to be. On Sunday, I decided to do something I had been secretly fantasizing about for years: visit the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Met. Alone. Without having to rush because Frank was bored, without having to explain why I liked a particular painting so much, without having to give up seeing the rooms that interested me most. I spent 3 hours lost among the Rembrandts and Goyas, reading every information plaque, sitting on the benches to contemplate the paintings that moved me. In the European paintings room, a pair of Japanese tourists asked me to take their picture. "Are you here by yourself?" the woman asked me in careful English. "Yes. It's my first time visiting the museum alone, and it's wonderful." How brave. I would never dare to go to a museum alone. Brave. No one had ever called me brave in my entire life. I had seen myself as obedient, compliant, sacrificing. But never brave. I left the Met with a sense of accomplishment I hadn't experienced in years. I had done something just for the pleasure of doing it, without having to justify it to anyone, without having to share the experience with someone who might not appreciate it. That afternoon, while strolling through Central Park, I came across a group of women my age doing Tai Chi by the pond. They moved with a serene grace that mesmerized me. "Would you like to try?" one of them asked when she noticed me watching. "I don't know if I can." "Of course, you can. Just follow our movements. There's no wrong way to do it." For half an hour, I moved with them, imitating their slow, fluid gestures. It was like a moving meditation, a way of being present in my own body that I hadn't experienced in years. "We come every Sunday at 5, the woman who had invited me told me. We're an informal group of women who decided to take care of our physical and mental health. If you like, you can join us anytime." Taking care of my physical and mental health. As if it were something I deserved, something worth investing time and attention in. "I would love to," I replied, and for the first time in months, I was making plans for the future that excited me. When I returned home that night, I sat on my sofa and looked around. The house was the same, but it felt completely different. It was no longer the stage for a life I had been living for others. It was my space, my sanctuary, my starting point for a new version of myself. I was 67, I had a house, some savings, and something I had lost for decades without even realizing it: hope. The hope that the best part of my life wasn't behind me, but was just beginning now. 6 months later, while watering the new plants I had put on my balcony, the aroma of coffee brewing in the kitchen reached me, and I smiled without realizing it. It was an automatic gesture I had recovered week after week, as if my face had remembered an expression it had forgotten for years. Monday had been my last meeting with Ricardo Mendoza. Frank had accepted all the terms my lawyer had proposed. I kept the apartment outright, he waived any claim to the property, and he would pay me spousal support of $500 a month for 10 years. "Your ex-husband was eager to close the deal," Ricardo had explained. "I think Linda is in a hurry to formalize their relationship, and they didn't want any more legal complications." $500 a month. It wasn't a fortune, but added to my retirement pension, it meant I could live with dignity without depending on anyone. That May morning, as I enjoyed my coffee on the balcony, I saw the mail carrier arrive with a certified envelope. It was from Sarah. Inside was a 3-page handwritten letter, with that careful handwriting I had taught her when she was 7 years old. "Dear Mom," it began. "I hope you are well. Months have passed without talking, and I think it's time you know some things." The letter went on to explain that David had lost almost all the money he had invested in cryptocurrency. His clients had sued him, they had had to sell their house, and now they lived in a rented apartment in the outer boroughs of New York. "David is very depressed," Sarah wrote. "He says the Bitcoin market is unpredictable, that no one could foresee the crash. We lost all our savings, and I've had to go back to work as a night shift nurse to pay off debts." Ethan's letter was even more desperate. His trading startup had failed in 2 months. Chloe had left him when they ran out of money, and now he was living again in the tiny apartment he had before meeting her. "Mom, I know I have no right to ask you for anything after how we treated you," he wrote. "But if you could lend us some money, just until I can get back on my feet. I promise this time it would be different." I folded the letters slowly and put them in a drawer alongside all the others that had arrived over the past few months. Pleas, reproaches, attempts at emotional manipulation, promises of change that I knew they wouldn't keep. At first, every letter had hurt like a physical wound. But over time, I had learned something fundamental: love cannot be begged for. It either exists freely, or it doesn't exist at all. That afternoon, I had my weekly painting class. It was something I had discovered by chance when I saw an advertisement at my neighborhood community center. The teacher, a retired artist named Elena, had created a group for older women who wanted to explore their creativity. Art has no age, she had told us on the first day. And it has no rules. You just have to let your hands express what your hearts feel. My first attempts had been clumsy, childlike. But little by little, I discovered I had a certain talent for landscapes. My classmates, Martha from the park, 5 other women between 60 and 75, had become my closest friends. We all had similar stories, marriages that ended in betrayal or indifference, children who saw us as funding sources, years of living for others until we lost sight of who we were. That afternoon, I was painting a sunset over Central Park, inspired by one of my Sunday walks, when Elena approached to look at my work. "Grace, this is beautiful. Have you thought about exhibiting your paintings?" "Exhibit? But I've only been painting for 6 months. Art is not measured by years of experience, but by the authenticity of expression. And your paintings have something that cannot be taught, emotional honesty." 2 weeks later, my paintings were hanging in a small gallery in Greenwich Village, along with the works of my classmates. It was a modest exhibition, just for friends and family, but for me, it represented something monumental. It was the first time in my life that someone considered what I created to have enough value to be publicly displayed. The opening was attended by my Tai Chi friends, my painting classmates, some neighbors I had met in recent months. People who appreciated me for who I was now, not for who I had been or what I could give them. I was admiring one of my landscapes when I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Mom?" I turned and saw Sarah standing at the gallery entrance. She was wearing clothes I didn't recognize, simpler than she usually wore, and she had dark circles under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. "Sarah, what are you doing here? I saw the ad in the local paper. I didn't know you painted. There's a lot about me you didn't know." We walked in silence between the paintings. Sarah stopped in front of one I had painted the week before, a woman sitting alone on a park bench, surrounded by golden light. "It's beautiful," she murmured. "Is that you?" "It is me. Or who I am learning to be." "Mom, I need to apologize." "You don't need to do anything, Sarah." "Yes, I do. For months, I've been thinking about everything that happened. How we treated you. How we saw you as a resource instead of a person. And what made you change your mind? Losing all our money. Being left with nothing. Understanding for the first time what it means to be truly alone and scared. And realizing that during all those years you were there for us, we were never there for you." Her eyes filled with tears that seemed genuine to me. "Sarah, I can't go back to being the mother I was before. I'm not asking you to go back to being that person. I'm asking, could we try to get to know each other? The real you and the real me? Without money involved, without expectations, without manipulation." I looked at my daughter, I really looked at her, for the first time in months. I saw a 38-year-old woman who had learned some painful lessons, who had lost the arrogance that had characterized her for years, who was perhaps ready to relate to me as one adult to another. "We could get coffee sometime," I said. "And talk. Just talk. I would really like that." It wasn't a dramatic reconciliation. We didn't hug or cry or promise to be a happy family again. But it was a start. An honest start. That night, when I returned home after the opening, I sat on my sofa with a glass of wine and reflected on the last 8 months. In December, I had been an invisible woman living to please others, measuring her worth by others' happiness, accepting crumbs of love as if they were banquets. Now I was a woman who painted sunsets, practiced Tai Chi in the park, made decisions without consulting anyone, and had learned to enjoy her own company without feeling like something was missing. Frank married Linda in April. I read about it in the local paper, where they published a photo of the wedding. They looked happy, and honestly, I was glad for them. Not because I forgave them, but because their happiness was no longer my responsibility. Ethan continued to send me letters asking for money. I read them out of courtesy but didn't reply. I had learned that helping someone who refuses to help themselves is not charity, it is complicity. One late May afternoon, while browsing a local flea market for frames for my new paintings, I ran into Eleanor, the woman I had met on the park bench months ago. "Grace, you look great. You cut your hair, didn't you?" "Among other things," I replied, smiling. "You look happy." "I feel happy. Do you know what I like most about seeing you like this? You no longer have that permanent look of apology you used to have." Permanent look of apology. She was right. For decades, I had walked through the world as if my existence were a bother to others, as if I needed to apologize for taking up space, for having needs, for existing. Now I walked tall, looked people in the eye, and occupied my space in the world without apologizing. This story I've told you is not just mine. It is the story of many women who reached old age believing their worth depended on what they could give others, not what they deserved to receive. For 67 years, I thought the greatest betrayal I could suffer was my husband leaving me. But the greatest betrayal had been the one I committed against myself, abandoning my dreams, my desires, my own voice, to live a life that pleased others. The Christmas Eve when I lost my family was the night I reclaimed myself. And now, at 68, I can say something I never thought I would say: this is the happiest time of my life. Because I am finally free. Free from the expectations of others, free from the need to please, free to live a life designed by me. And you, who have listened to me this far, let me ask you something: have you ever lived through something similar? Or do you know someone who has been in this situation? Tell me in the comments. If this story has touched your heart, if it has made you reflect on your own life or the life of a loved one, please leave your like and subscribe to the channel. Because stories like this need to be told, they need to reach people who still live imprisoned by the need to please others. Sometimes, the greatest freedom comes when we lose everything we thought was necessary to be happy. And we discover that the only thing we truly needed was ourselves.